Many leaders and business owners think they are just one hire away. That if they could just hire that one all-star, rock star team member to add to their business, then things would really start to take off. But in my experience, for most leaders and most businesses, they're actually one fire away from seeing their organization go to the next level. You may already know who I'm talking about right now, that person on your team who has a bad attitude, has poor performance. Maybe it used to be working and now it's not working with them anymore, and you know that something needs to change. Many times the best way for an organization to move forward is actually addition by subtraction. And that's why today we're going to talk about how important it is to fire in order to move forward.
Welcome to the Shift Podcast. I'm Evan, this is Matt, and today we're going to talk about a really tough subject, but one that's necessary to grow your business, and that is firing.
Yeah, absolutely. And as a leader, you have both the opportunity and the responsibility to fire people. If you've never had to fire anyone, that's actually not a badge of honor. It says one of two things. Either you're inexperienced, you just haven't been doing it long enough to have the opportunity. It's coming, I promise. Or you just lack the courage to do what needs to be done for your organization. Neither of which are a good thing, by the way. I would say it this way. You are not a leader if you can't fire people. You are also not a leader if you enjoy firing people.
Yeah.
And the reason why is because leaders have to carry both empathy and responsibility. We carry empathy for the individual on one hand, and we carry responsibility for the organization on the other hand. And so it's important as leaders that we understand how to navigate and blend these two things together.
Yeah, you're right. There is a responsibility to firing, and there is a balance, right? You have both a responsibility for the business and an empathy for the individual. And that balance makes this incredibly stressful. But what I'm hoping is that we can bring some clarity around this.
Yeah. I think this is hard because most good leaders genuinely care about their people.
I believe that too.
They care about the people on their team, and they should. That's a good thing. The fact that you care is a good thing. If you struggle with the idea of firing someone because you're concerned about that individual, that's a good thing. Right? So we don't want to downplay that at all. But you have to understand that when you lead an organization, you can have empathy for the individual, but you also ultimately carry responsibility for the success of the organization. Right. And sometimes it can feel like those things are at odds with each other.
Right.
And that's where I think the rub is for a lot of leaders. You know, for nonprofits, for cause-centered or faith-based businesses, I think this can be even harder. But we've got to understand that, and this is a hard concept, I think, for some people to understand, but even charities don't exist to employ people as an act of charity, right? The employment piece isn't the charity, right?
Yeah.
Like we're doing all this good in society or whatever, but not at the employment level. At the employment level, we need the right people on the team.
Yeah, and we're going to get more into this in the episode, but man, there is a balance. Like you're not running a charity,
right?
And for people, like you're exactly right. You're not employing people as a charity.
Yep.
It has a purpose. I found in my business that it's skills on paper, right, that get you in the door.
Sure.
But then it really is character that keeps you on the team.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think great team members really have both. They have character and skill.
Yep.
I think that's necessary for somebody to be on the team as a strong contributor long term. Short term, they might contribute with one or the other, but long term, you've got to have both. You have to have both character and skill. And so when it comes to this idea of I may have to let someone go, this is no longer working out. This isn't, I don't see a sustainable path here. Yeah. I think we've got to answer the question, is this a character issue or is it a skills issue, right? Because knowing which one it is really starts to determine how we're going to walk down this path, to potentially separate. My dad used to say it this way. He would ask the question, is this a training problem or is this an attitude problem, right? Which is another way of saying character and skill, right? But those were his words. Is this a training problem or is this an attitude problem? Because I can help you with the training, but the attitude is all on you.
Yeah.
And I think as leaders, like we understand that, right? If somebody is simply undertrained or underdeveloped, man, there's a lot we can do for them. There's a lot we can do to invest in them, whether it's personally, one-on-one, or education, classes, court. Like there's a lot of things we can do to develop and get someone's skills up.
I'm glad that you brought it up, that it is there's a difference, and we need to determine, is this something that I can train and fix?
Yeah.
Or do I need to let this person go?
Right.
Because for those listening and watching, you don't want to just go right to firing based on a feeling. Like you need to assess the situation, and you need to have a way to assess it properly.
Yeah.
It reminds me of an employee that I had. The guy was clearly underperforming, and I thought, okay, what is going on here? I thought I trained him well. Clearly not. So,
Right.
so I invested more in training. You know, I spent time in the field with him, and we worked on it. Let him go back out to do his thing. The next few days, still underperforming. Same feedback from the customers. Same problem. And so I thought, okay, this is a vision problem. He doesn't understand what we're all about.
Right. Why we're doing it.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. So we dealt with the why. And so I went back and I instilled vision and then gave him an incentive, financial incentive to perform.
Sure.
Still underperforming. In the end, it became really clear to me that this was just a character problem. And so we let him go.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and sometimes that's what you have to do. But I love the fact that when you saw a problem, the first thing you did was take responsibility and assume, well, I must not have trained him well.
Right.
Right. Now, maybe you did train him well, but that's not the point. The point is that as a leader, you took the responsibility, right? That's the extreme ownership thing that we talk about so often. And I think that's something that's important to remember. And a lot of leaders, I see this, even, with clients that I, coach and consult with, business owners, they'll be frustrated with an employee, with someone on their team, but sometimes they don't take a step back and realize they may have been a contributing factor to the situation because they didn't train or they didn't cast vision or all of those things. So I think you absolutely did the right thing, but at the end of the day, turns out it wasn't really that, right? It was something else.
Right.
But you don't know that until you go through those steps and you go through that process. And so I think it's important to do it. And, I think one of the questions, that we want to spend a few minutes kind of unpacking in this episode is, how do you know when it's time?
Yeah, how do you know when it's time?
Right. When is it time to cut the cord, to separate, to part ways and all of that? And, outside of, please get legal and HR advice from the appropriate parties. Like, we're not subscribing to like, hey, here's an actual like legal process.
Yeah.
We're talking about it more from like a high level ownership, mindset of, here are the things you need to be looking for. Here are the red flags that I think would indicate to you it is time, or at least it may be coming time to make a really hard decision that is going to be hard for you and hard for the person. And by the way, it should never be easy to fire somebody.
That's right.
If it's easy, I think you've gotten callous. If it's easy, I think you've become a little hard-hearted. It should never be easy. That doesn't mean you don't do it. It doesn't mean you don't do the right thing for your organization and for your team. But the goal is not to say this is ever going to be easy. We just want to give you maybe a grid to run some things through so that the decision itself is more clear.
Right.
Even though the execution is always going to be a little challenging. So, how do you know when it's time to fire somebody? And I'm not talking about, let's set aside the egregious things. Like, you caught them taking cash out of the register, right? Like, okay, you got to get fired for that, right? They show up drunk or high or whatever. Okay, these are obvious things. I'm not talking about this. I'm talking about there's more of a process, and there's this gradual sense, there's this gnawing going on inside of you that says something isn't right with this person, and I got to get to the bottom of it. I got to figure it out. What are some indicators? A few thoughts. Again, not an exhaustive list and in no particular order, but one indicator for me that it may be time to part ways with someone is when they're simply not growing with me anymore.
Right.
If that person on your team is not growing with you, then that could be a sign that it's time to make a change. Now, maybe they've served on your team for a while, and maybe they're actually halfway good at their job, right? Maybe they've performed well for a long period of time, but you've outgrown them, or your organization has outgrown them. Where you're going, they can't keep up anymore. They can't keep up the pace. And so that may be a time that you're going to have to consider making a change. In a case like this, a lot of times one of the challenges is that this person is a good person. They're just not a growing person.
Right.
And if you're a leader, if you're a business owner who is growth-minded, you want people on your team who are also growth-minded. They're growth-oriented. And so if they cap out, you're still going and they're not, eventually there's going to be a rub there. And so they could be a good person, but not a growing person. And as I remember someone saying one time that they said, I don't have a spot on my org chart for good guy, right? Like there's no good guy box on my org chart. And that's hard, right? Because I love this person. They've been with me for a long time, but they're just not able to, they just can't cut it anymore.
Yeah. I think the second one that we can add to our list is you've given them coaching, but they haven't improved.
Yeah.
Right. So this could be due to training or attitude, or maybe an example would have been the story that I just gave.
Right.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. Like you spend time with them, you assume it's a coaching, education, training problem.
Yep.
You give them more of that, but nothing really changes.
Right.
Nothing really improves. And so I think that's where you're talking about, repeat offenders, basically, right? Like this is still a problem no matter what we do, right? Like I remember someone saying one time that great management is taking away excuses. So it's like, well, once I've taken away all of these excuses, if there's still a problem, there's nothing else I can do for you here, right? So when you've given them coaching but they're not improving, I think that's a good one. Another one that I would add to the list is when you find yourself complaining to other people about this employee, I think that's a sign that something's got to change.
It's a great red flag,
right? Like when you go home and you're complaining to your spouse about this person, more than once. I mean, we're allowed to vent from time to time. Man, if you're venting on your wife or your husband, your best friend or whatever, if this is happening as a pattern, as a recurring thing, I think that's a really big red flag, because what that tells you is that you're carrying angst, you're carrying frustration that either you haven't had the courage to deal with, or you've tried to deal with it and it's not improving. And so when that is an ongoing pattern, I think that's a sign that it may be time.
Yeah. And man, we hope that you guys finding this helpful and you can relate to this. I want to say number 4, our 4th red flag is going to be that you dread seeing them, right?
Yeah. Crap. John's here.
Billy's here again. Okay. So in other words, you've got animosity toward that person, or everything that they say feels like an excuse.
Well, and that's exactly what happens, right? Is if once this goes on for a certain amount of time, you've built up this sort of underlying frustration with the person. It seems silly. It's almost something you would see like on, The Office or something like that. But like you see them walking down the hall and you duck back into your office, right? Because you don't want to even like interact with them or make eye contact with. And everything they say, it feels like an excuse. It feels like you're trying to poke holes in everything because you've lost trust in their ability to deliver.
Exactly.
Once that happens, very difficult to recover from there. And so I think these are good red flags to keep in mind. The 5th one, and I think these are getting maybe progressively heavier in some way. So this is a little bit of a heavy episode.
But more relatable.
Yeah, relatable. And you notice I'm smiling a lot. It's like, man, you can say hard things if you smile. So, if you're watching on YouTube, you can see a lot of smiles. If you're just listening to the audio, then maybe you can hear the smile in my voice. But that's just trying to counteract the heaviness of some of this stuff. But number 5 is, it might be time to fire. It might be time to make a change if you wouldn't rehire them today. I think that's a tougher bar, right? Because sometimes we have people who have been on our teams for a while, and maybe it's a short while. Man, they've been with me 3 days and I've already figured this out. But maybe they've been with you for months. Maybe they've been with you for years. But knowing what you know today, you would not rehire them if you had the opportunity. And so, like in my mind, it really begs the question, if I wouldn't rehire them, why would I retain them?
Right.
If you wouldn't rehire them, it may be time to fire them.
Yeah, and at some point, you can't just continue adding people to your team. You've got to eventually replace them, right?
Yeah, just economically, you can't afford to just keep adding people forever.
Right. So think about like the draft season. You're only going to make the cut if you perform.
Right.
And the purpose of a sports team, last time that I checked, was to win.
Right. Some of them haven't gotten the memo, but yes.
Oh, man. Yeah. But you know what? In business, I think it's the same thing. It's to win, to stay in business.
Right. Well, and on another episode, we talked about like a SEAL team, right? It's a high-performing team.
Right.
You're putting this group of people together because they are strong contributors in their own right. And then as a team, you have the synergy, and then that takes the results to the next level. And so, this idea of the weakest link or the weakest team member, at some point you can handle that, you can absorb that to some extent for some period of time. But there will come a point in time where that's not sustainable. And I think, when you get to that place where you say, I wouldn't rehire this person, then it might be time to replace them. And again, I want our audience to hear that this is not at all coming from a place of being just like cold-hearted, bottom line, business, whatever. It's just saying these are realities of leadership. These are realities of business ownership. And you can do it with good intentions, with kindness. You can do it with care and empathy for the individual. But these are things that have to happen in leadership and in business. There's just no way around it. One other thing that I'm going to add to this, and honestly, I don't even know if I would say this is on the list, but it is maybe this bigger picture concept. And I remember hearing this from a really well-known business coach and consultant in the faith-based world, Sam Chand. He talked about this. And I remember the first time he said it, it hit so hard because it's such like this harsh truth. I wanted to argue. I did internally. I'm like, that can't be right. That's too hard or whatever. And I've come to believe that maybe it's true. He said this: the best time to fire someone is the very first time that it crosses your mind. And I'm like, that's crazy, right? Because any of us could, thoughts go through our minds all the time, like I'm trying to kind of like put the disclaimers on it or whatever. But his point was, if you as the leader, if it's on your mind, it's there for a reason. And once it's, because you don't think that about your good people. You don't think that about your high performers.
That's right.
It never even crosses your mind to fire the people who have a good attitude, they show up on time, they deliver results, they're team players, all of that, like never even crosses your mind. So if it crosses your mind, I may need to let this person go, usually that's the indicator that there's a whole bunch of stuff under the surface that maybe you haven't, it's in your subconscious, but you haven't become fully conscious of it, fully aware of it yet. And so when that thought forms into a conscious thought in your mind, there's something there, there's something behind it, and you need to pay attention to it.
But you're right. You don't think that toward your best performers or your best people. You're actually thinking, how can I give this person a raise? Or like, let me look for an excuse to bonus this person.
Incentivize them.
Incentivize them.
How can I do profit sharing? All these kinds of things. So with your good people, you're naturally thinking that way, which means if you're thinking about letting someone go, there's a reason. Even if you can't pinpoint what the reason is, that reason is there.
Good.
I'll just say this, just based on my personal reflection, and I've led large teams of people, for long periods of time. My biggest regret when it comes to firing was always that I didn't do it sooner. And I always tried to err on the side of giving people more time, giving them more grace, giving them second and third and fifth and 10th and 100th chances to get it right. And that was the right thing to do. I don't at all regret having grace for people, because Lord knows I've needed grace for myself, right? Like we want to lead in that way.
Right.
Having said that, I never got to the point of actually letting someone go and was like, man, I should have waited a little longer. I should have held out for it. Like, no, by the time it got to that point, like, man, I wish I'd have done this sooner. It was such a huge sigh of relief. And part of the reason is because I carried the angst for too long, because I wanted to give them every chance I possibly could to succeed. But part of it too, and this is another aspect of why firing is actually a very important function for leaders, is I began to realize how it affected the rest of the team when I allowed an underperformer or a bad apple to stay on the team longer than I should. What I learned is that mercy for the one created agony for the rest. And sometimes it wasn't just that I breathed a deep sigh of relief when that conversation was finally over, it's that the rest of the team did too. Because I promise you, if you have someone on your team who needs to go, your team feels that even more acutely than you do, because they're the ones who are shoulder to shoulder with them every single day. And here's the issue. Your team is watching you, and they're watching what you tolerate from everybody on the team. And what will generally happen, there are exceptions, but what will generally happen is everybody will sink to the lowest performance standard. They won't rise to the highest performance standard. And so if you allow a low performer to stay on your team for a long period of time, people will naturally begin to let their performance slip to meet that level, because from their viewpoint, that must be what's acceptable here. That must be what's okay here. And so I would say this: don't underestimate the impact and influence that your decision or lack thereof is having on the rest of the team. Because when you have someone on your team not performing well, bad attitude, violating the values and principles of your organization and all of that, if you let that go on, your team will assume one of two things. Either one, that you don't know what's happening with that employee, or two, that you don't have the courage to deal with it. And neither one of those is going to build rapport with you and the rest of the team.
Right.
Neither one of those is going to build morale with the team. If they think you're oblivious and a moron, that doesn't help you. If they think you're spineless and a wimp, that's not going to help you either. And so don't underestimate that when what you tolerate really becomes an endorsement of what you're going to have across your whole organization.
That's good.
And I realize some of that's really hard to say and hear, and this is one of our heavier episodes probably. But I think it's so important, because this is the real world that we live in and have to deal with every day.
Yeah, it is heavy. It is pretty emotional, but we want to move to our final point in this podcast episode, and that is, don't just let this stay emotional, but outsource your emotions to a clear process for firing. And so we have here a list of a process that I think you guys watching, listening might find helpful. And we're going to go through this. It's a list of 4. All right. So number 1, have KPIs. Okay. KPIs stand for key performance indicators. And so you want to have measurable goals. What does performance look like? What does underperformance look like? That's what KPIs are for. And have a KPI for each department, whether it's marketing or sales or whatever it may be.
And even each person, for that matter.
And each person, right. Yeah. And you could give them this KPI. Here's the expectation. And here's the cool thing. Top performers want to know that they are performing.
Yep, absolutely.
They itch if they don't know that they're doing a stellar job.
Right.
Give your top performers KPIs and they might even perform better.
Yeah.
Scheduled coaching, right? So provide regular feedback to people who are underperforming. Or if you can see this slippery slope, right?
Well, and I would even add to that, not even just if they're underperforming. Give feedback all along the way, because then there's a lot of clarity around it. But particularly when somebody is not reaching those levels, being more intense and intentional about that coaching is so important, so they know.
Yeah. And then part of those coaching sessions, give them a timeline. Give them some sort of a time frame for improvement. Give them a deadline to fix performance.
Yeah, that's only fair.
Number 4, set clear expectations. This might sound small, but people who are underperforming, they need someone to constantly set that expectation, maybe even daily, until they start to get it right and hit stride. Ensure they understand what success really looks like.
Yeah. Well, it's back to this idea of expectations. And we've talked about this on another episode, but the idea that quality is meeting stated expectations, right? Like, there's no objective measure for quality. I only know what quality is because I know what the expectations are. And so I think when we're talking about managing, leading team members, especially when we're getting to these more sensitive situations, honestly, it's not fair to them if they don't know what the expectations are. And so, my view is that no one should be surprised when they get fired. If somebody is surprised when they get fired, you haven't done your job as a leader. And I say that with a little bit of boldness, because I've learned through this, because I've done this poorly before, and I had to grow. I had to learn how to do this. And so I'll tell you a story about a time that I did it well. I got lots of stories about how I didn't do it well, but to protect, but to protect the guilty, me, and to keep from HR lawsuits happening, we won't air those. But here's a time that I think I followed this process really well, and here's how it worked out. This is years ago, 20 plus years ago. I was managing a team of people, and they were hourly labor, and of course, in that environment, when it's hourly labor, time in and time out matter, right? Because they're getting paid by the hour, and there are shifts, and there's all these things, right? And so these were back in the days where of course you had digital clock in, clock out, But if you were late for your shift, there was like a manual logbook, and you had to write down, the date and the time, and the reason you were late. You had to write it out by hand, right? So this particular employee had been late multiple times, and we had multiple conversations. And this was in a corporate setting, so there were like HR processes that I had to follow as the manager. And we did, first written warning, final warning, all the things, right? So final written warning, big, that's the heavy stuff, right?
Yeah.
So we had this conversation, and I said, look, dude, I love you, love having you work here, but you have to show up on time. We've been through this whole process. I said, if you are late again, one more time, I'm going to have to let you go. I have to fire you. Like, I don't have a choice, right? We've gotten to that point. The very next day, he shows up late. And I'm watching the clock, right? Because I know this might be coming. And so I'm like, I know in my mind, like, I'm going to have to let him go today. But I had done a good enough job preparing him, coaching him, giving him every opportunity, stating the expectations, following a process, that he wrote in the logbook the date, the time, his name, and under comments, he said, I'm fired. So that made the conversation pretty easy at that point, because he already knew, right? It wasn't a surprise. And again, I want to pat myself on the back for the one time that I really got this right. There's other times I didn't, for
Once
sure.
in a decade.
Yeah. But I think that highlights, if the process is done well, it's not really a shock to the person. They know what's coming because they know they're not meeting the expectation. Doesn't make it easy, but it might make it a little smooth.
And we've talked about this in other episodes, right? A couple of times, and that's the idea of extreme ownership. And so as the leader, you cause the problem, you can fix the problem. You hired them. Right. You can either fix the problem or you can fire them. Right. And so we hope that 4-step process is helpful to those listening.
Well, and I think it's true. I think sometimes leaders, we don't want to fire them because that would mean admitting that we shouldn't have hired them, right?
Yeah, sure.
But I would say, if you know you made the hiring mistake, then don't think you can avoid it by not firing them, right? Yeah. Like don't allow one mistake to bleed into more mistakes. Just because you made a mistake in hiring them doesn't mean you have to prolong the mistake by keeping them, right? And so take ownership no matter where you're at in the process. As we wrap up, I want to just maybe give one more, encouragement or challenge. If you're a leader, if you're a business owner, to remember the responsibility for your organization is really in your hands. And if you are the owner, remember, this business is part of your life. I'll never forget, there was one time that I was struggling with somebody on my team, and I was having the conversations. I probably needed to escalate the conversations, but I was feeling it because I liked them and I didn't know how to navigate all of it, but life was hard and all of that. And I remember I was sitting down one day approving payroll, and payroll, like, my name is on the front of the check, right? Like, I'm the one signing the check. Yep. And I'm approving payroll, and I'm seeing, it was digital, but, seeing the checks that are about to go out and realizing I am paying this person to make my life miserable.
Oh, man.
And that sounds really harsh, but that's what it is. When you're a business owner and you've gotten to that point with somebody, that's what you're doing. I'm actually giving them money, my money from my business to make my life miserable. And that really doesn't make a lot of sense. Right. Like, life is too short for that. So why would you pay someone to make your life miserable? Yes, firing is hard. We're not saying that you should ever approach this flippantly, cold-heartedly, callously, any of those things. Right. But this is a reality that if your business is going to move forward, you are going to have to fire people. Maybe not today, but I promise you at some point it's coming.
This is tough for a lot of people. So if you're struggling to make really difficult decisions in your business, like firing, let us know. You can reach out to Matt or I. Our contact info is in the description or the show notes. We actually love helping business owners navigate really difficult situations.
I thought you were about to say we love coming in and firing people, but
no one does.
We won't fire people for you, but we'll help you walk through the process.
It won't be a what do they call a walk through the daisies or through the tulips, but it'll be easier when you have a process and someone to help you navigate.
Yeah, some help and some support.
Yeah, so reach out. We're here to help out. And that's it for this episode of the Shift Podcast. We hope that what we shared here in this episode makes it easier for you to make really tough decisions in your business. Please share, like, subscribe, all that good stuff. And we hope to see you on the next one.